What if a motorcycle club war could consume an entire region? Imagine a conflict so brutal, so relentless, that it would transform the criminal underworld of Scandinavia forever. Between 1983 and 1997, the Great Nordic Biker War would become the most violent gang conflict in modern European history. The numbers are staggering. Over 36 military depot thefts, rocket launchers used as weapons, confirmed murders, and 4 countries transformed into a blood-soaked battleground. 2 motorcycle clubs, the Hells Angels and the Bandidos, would wage a war so intense that it would reshape criminal landscapes, challenge law enforcement, and create legends that would echo through decades. This wasn't just a territorial dispute. This was a fight for survival, power, and dominance.
In the world of motorcycle clubs, rivalries simmer and tensions ignite as clubs clash for territorial control, power, or personal vendettas.
In just 3 years, these clubs would spread terror across Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland, control millions in illegal trade, assassinate multiple club presidents, and use military-grade weapons that would turn city streets into war zones.
The Great Nordic Biker War stands as one of the most significant biker conflicts in history. Spanning from 1994 to 1997, this war was an intense battle for supremacy, territory, and control over the lucrative drug trade in Scandinavia.
8 bullshit MC members dead, 3 presidents murdered, rocket launchers, grenades, betrayals, ambushes. This is not a story of criminals. This is a story of human nature, of how quickly brotherhood can transform into bloodshed, how power corrupts, and how a single spark can ignite a war that consumes everything in its path. Welcome to the Great Nordic Biker War. Territory, a word that would redefine violence in Copenhagen. In the quiet corners of Denmark's capital, an unspoken battle was brewing. A conflict that would transform motorcycle clubs from rebellious groups into ruthless armies. September 1983 marked the beginning of a nightmare that would consume Scandinavia for years to come. 3 men walked into So Promenaden bar, bullshit MC patches gleaming, unaware they were stepping into history's crosshairs.
It would all start in September of 1983 at an establishment called So Promenaden. This place was like a restaurant/bar/nightclub. The facts on that aren't exactly clear, but what we do know is that this was a place frequented by local biker gangs. But this establishment was on Hells Angels territory.
What happens when territorial pride meets unbridled aggression? Blood, lots of it. 2 men died that night. Soren Grabel, just 20, and Flemming Jensen, 21, became the first casualties in a war that would consume an entire region.
A bar fight broke out, with 2 bullshit members named Soren Grabel Grander, age 20, and Flemming Halde Jensen, age 21, both losing their lives due to being attacked with knives and bottles. The third member, Michael Peter Enoch, actually managed to escape, though he was severely injured. These were the first deaths of the Copenhagen Biker War.
The Hells Angels didn't just fight, they executed. Bent Blondie Nielsen, their enforcer, received 16 years for double murder.
The one that would receive the harshest sentence was Bent Svanny Nielsen, more commonly known as Blondie, and he received 16 years for double murder.
But prison wasn't punishment. It was fuel. The numbers told a chilling story. By 1988, 8 bullshit MC members lay dead.
But something interesting happens. The leaders of bullshit kept getting killed. So I don't know if I mentioned it already. I think they had 8 deaths.
3 presidents assassinated. The most infamous? Mackerel. Shot 16 times in his own car, his wife barely escaping the murderous barrage.
A few years behind him, Janka killed probably the strongest leader they ever had, and his name was Mackerel. And Janka killed Mackerel right in front of his wife, machine gunned the guy to death.
Jorn Janke Nielsen, the triggerman, became a legend. A phantom who fled to France and Canada, leaving behind a trail of terror. Christiania wasn't just a commune anymore. It was a war zone. Millions of dollars in cannabis trade hung in the balance. Bullshit MC controlled the market, but the Hells Angels wanted in. Every transaction became a potential ambush. Local residents watched helpless as violence transformed their streets into a battlefield where survival was the only currency. 1988 arrived quietly, too quietly. Bullshit MC surrendered. Their clubhouse sold, their vests burned.
They soon disbanded in 1988. The final words from the Bullshit crew came from their last president, Jan Michael Linde, aka Curl, who called up the Hells Angels and said that they've sold their clubhouse and burned their vests.
A single phone call confirmed what everyone already knew. The Hells Angels had won.
And in 1988, they stopped. They gave it up. They said that we don't want to do this anymore, and they acquiesced to the Hells Angels there, and that seemed to be the end of it.
Or so they thought. Because lurking in the shadows, a new threat was emerging. The Bandidos, fresh from Texas, hungry, unrelenting, and they weren't coming to negotiate. The Great Nordic Biker War was about to begin. Hey brothers, tired of YouTube's BS and censorship? It's time to break free. That's why I've shifted gears to Patreon, where I can bring you the raw, uncensored content you crave. Join my Patreon crew and get an insane package deal. Exclusive early access to all videos, days before YouTube, 100% ad-free viewing experience. Uncensored, no-holds-barred community discussions, double the content. 2 killer videos every single week. VIP access, direct interaction with yours truly, inside scoop, exclusive biker world updates you won't find anywhere else. Ready to join the elite? Hit that Patreon link now. Your support doesn't just keep us rolling, it fuels a revolution of uncensored, unrestricted content. Join now and unlock a world of exclusive benefits. Triumph was fleeting. The Hells Angels believed they had conquered Denmark, erasing Bullshit MC from existence.
Anyway, with the war over, the Hells Angels became the dominant MC in Denmark.
But victory is a dangerous illusion, especially when new predators are circling. From the vast landscapes of Texas came a force that would rewrite the rules of territorial conflict, the Bandidos, a club built on chaos, pride, and an insatiable hunger for power. Who were these newcomers? More than just another motorcycle club. The term 1%ers wasn't just a label, it was a declaration of war. By the early 90s, the Bandidos had set their sights on Europe, with Scandinavia firmly in their crosshairs.
Until the Bandidos slowly started making their way into Europe. And it all started first in France, in Marseille, I guess that's how I pronounce it. There was a small club there that became Bandidos, and that was the first time Bandidos would plant their flag in Europe.
They didn't rush in with guns blazing. No, they were smarter, strategic, patient. 1993 became their year of calculated invasion. Their first move? Alliances. The remnants of Bullshit MC, now a shadow of their former self, were pulled into the Bandidos' orbit.
I started getting complaints from Scandinavian members, specifically Danish members, that the Bandidos were very interested in planting their flag in the Scandinavian countries. And aside from, the Hells Angels not wanting them there, they were courting former members of Bullshit.
Other clubs like the Morticians MC, tired of the Hells Angels' iron grip, began to follow. The Bandidos' network grew silently, like a cancer spreading beneath the skin of the criminal underworld. Was this just about territory? Never that simple. This was a war of ideologies. The Hells Angels represented control, dominance, Their patch, their symbols, their pride. But the Bandidos, they were fire. Always burning brighter, always seeking more. It wasn't about money or drugs. It was about proving they were the most powerful club in Europe.
So all the members that the Scandinavian Hells Angels were having issues with were now petitioning the Bandidos to become, Bandidos and represent the Bandidos in Europe.
Numbers told their own story of expansion. In 1992, they established their first chapter in Trondheim, Norway. By 1993, Sweden became their next target, absorbing the Dirty Dragons MC in Malmö. The Hells Angels, once considered untouchable, now found themselves fighting on multiple fronts.
This led to the expansion of the Hells Angels throughout Scandinavia, with the next chapter to be opened in Norway, Trondheim, with the Rowdies MC being the first Norwegian Hells Angels chapter in 1992, and Sweden soon following, as the Dirty Dragons from Malmö were also patched over in 1993. The Dragons allegedly were allowed in and endorsed by the Danish Hells Angels because they apparently defeated 2 other local clubs for the right to be Hells Angels and wear their club colours.
Their monopoly was crumbling. Adaptation became the Bandidos' greatest weapon. While the Hells Angels focused on preserving their reputation, the Bandidos concentrated on expanding power. A chapter in Denmark wasn't enough. They wanted a Nordic stronghold, a territorial empire that would make their predecessors look like amateurs. The first shots were about to be fired. In 1994, the simmering tension would explode. The Great Nordic Biker War was no longer a possibility. It was an inevitability. The Bandidos had arrived, and they were ready to burn everything to the ground. The stage was set. The players were in position. Chaos was coming. Violence erupted like a forgotten pressure valve. By 1994, what had been simmering beneath Scandinavia's surface transformed into an uncontrollable inferno. The Bandidos and Hells Angels weren't just fighting for territory anymore. They were fighting for survival.
So to paint a proper picture, you've now got 2 large rival gangs accumulating chapters across the Nordic countries, slowly gaining power on both sides, which created a biker gang Cold War between the Hells Angels and the Bandidos. Although the Cold War would soon escalate through their supporting clubs.
This wasn't a simple gang conflict. This was total war. How do motorcycle clubs escalate a conflict? With terrifying creativity. The first major strike came in February 1994, a night that would be remembered in whispered legends. A nightclub became a battlefield when Hells Angels ambushed Bandidos members. 13 shots rang out, shattering the evening's quiet.
The first initiation of war would really happen in early February of 1994, where several Bandidos members in Denmark got ambushed by the Hells Angels in a nightclub while they were holding a party on the rooftop. With 13 gunshots being slung around, this resulted in the first official death of the war.
Hakem Bowman, a Hells Angels associate, died. 3 others fell wounded. A brutal message sent in blood and bullets. Military-grade weaponry changed everything.
In February, here it is. An anti-tank rocket is fired at the Hells Angels clubhouse. They weren't playing around. No dynamite under the cars. No, just stood out in front of that clubhouse and pulled that trigger.
In February of 1994, several Bandidos members broke into a Swedish armory, stealing 16 Bofors shoulder-fire anti-tank launchers along with a shit ton of other guns and ammunition. Rocket launchers. The bikers now had rocket launchers. But these numbers are only estimates, as the Danish and Swedish militaries have refrained from releasing the accurate numbers.
The Bandidos responded with shocking audacity. In March 1994, they targeted a rebels' clubhouse in southern Sweden using a rocket launcher. The explosion was catastrophic, miraculously leaving no casualties. But the message was crystal clear. They were playing for keeps, and no target was off limits. Tactics revealed fundamental differences between the gangs.
Bombings became a terrifying trademark of this war, as rival clubs targeted each other's clubhouses, businesses, and even innocent civilians caught in the crossfire.
The Hells Angels preferred precise, targeted hits, surgical strikes designed to send a message. The Bandidos? They were chaos incarnate, aggressive, unpredictable, willing to use mayhem as a strategic weapon. Each attack was a statement, each bullet a declaration of war. By mid-1994, the conflict metastasized. Norway became a battleground. Finland followed quickly. The Bandidos established a new chapter in Finland, targeting Overkill MC and Iron Hog MC for recruitment. Gunfights erupted in Helsinki streets. The Hells Angels saw this as a direct challenge to their Nordic dominance. No club could remain neutral.
The 22nd of June in Finland, a Clam MC president is shot and killed by a Hells Angels member.
The Nordic biker scene transformed into a minefield.
The violence escalated rapidly as the war spread across Scandinavian borders. Assassinations, executions, and ambushes became the order of the day, leading to a climate of fear and lawlessness. No biker club was safe from the bloodshed.
Every independent club was forced to choose sides, Hells Angels or Bandidos.
As smaller clubs were coerced to align with either the Hells Angels or the Bandidos, facing severe consequences if they resisted.
Those who didn't pick risked becoming collateral damage in a war that was rapidly spinning out of control. Who would survive? The answer was written in blood. Both the Hells Angels and Bandidos were all in, determined to carve their empires into Scandinavia's very flesh. The streets would tell the story, a narrative of violence, ambition, and unrelenting conflict. The war had only just begun. The year 1995 was marked by relentless violence that only seemed to spiral further out of control. By now, the Hells Angels and the Bandidos were no longer just two rival clubs. They were two empires, locked in a bitter struggle for total dominance over Scandinavia. The fighting spread across borders, taking lives and destroying everything in its path. It was the death of Michael Lundgren, the president of the Bandidos in Sweden, that proved to be the war's most significant turning point. On July 17, 1995, Lundgren was riding his motorcycle back from a visit to the Undertaker's MC in Helsinki when tragedy struck.
On the 17th of July 1995, the president of the Bandidos in Sweden, a Mr. Michael Lundgren, was returning home from a visit with the Undertaker's MC in Helsinki. He didn't travel alone and he had one member with him, although while riding, the other guy's bike had broken down. So, rather than stopping, Michael carried on driving towards Helsingborg.
A car pulled up alongside him and without warning, the driver fired at him, hitting Lundgren with several bullets despite his flak vest. The assailants then ran him off the road, and as he crashed to the ground, the car drove over him.
But while he was driving, a car pulled up next to him and shot him several times with what was believed to be a Carl Gustaf M45. Even though he was wearing a flak vest, one of the bullets managed to penetrate. And if the bullet didn't kill him, then the fact that he crashed and was then run over by a car certainly did.
His body was later found, and at first the authorities believed it was an accident. It wasn't until they discovered the bullet wounds that they realized this was no simple road mishap. Lundgren's death was a devastating blow to the Bandidos. It wasn't just the loss of a leader, it was a direct attack on their very foundation. And the retaliation came swiftly. In a show of strength and defiance, the Bandidos launched an attack on Hells Angels-affiliated clubhouses across Scandinavia, using their now infamous weaponry to send a message. Rocket launchers, grenades, and automatic rifles were all in play. It was no longer just street violence. This was full-on warfare. The Bandidos didn't stop at Lundgren's murder. They continued to strike back against Hells Angels strongholds, bombarding clubhouses and leaving a trail of destruction. In one incident, a Hells Angels clubhouse in Helsinki was hit with an anti-tank rocket, causing massive damage but miraculously no fatalities. The escalation of this violence was a clear message. The Bandidos would not be intimidated. They were out for blood, and they were willing to go to extreme lengths to prove it.
95, the Bandidos fire another anti-tank rocket at a Hells Angels Perspective clubhouse in Helsinki. Then on July 26, they didn't stop there. They fired another anti-tank rocket at a Hells Angel Prospect clubhouse in Helsingborg.
Meanwhile, the Hells Angels were far from idle. As their rival grew stronger, they launched their own counteroffensive. In Sweden, the Hells Angels attacked a gathering of Bandidos, gunning down members and wounding several. It wasn't just about settling old scores anymore. It was about outlasting the opposition. The Hells Angels knew they couldn't afford to lose control of Scandinavia, and every attack by the Bandidos was a direct challenge to their reign. By the end of 1995, the war had escalated beyond the point of no return. Smaller clubs were forced to choose sides. The once quiet streets of Copenhagen, Malmö, and Helsinki had become battlegrounds, and no one was safe. The police were under immense pressure, launching multiple raids in an attempt to stop the flow of weapons and drugs that funded the violence. But every raid only seemed to spark more conflict, and every arrest turned into a new vendetta. The war had become a monster, and no one seemed capable of stopping it. As the bodies continued to pile up, the question remained, who would finally win this bloody war? By 1996, the Great Nordic Biker War had morphed into an uncontrollable beast. The violence had not only decimated the biker clubs, but had also put entire regions of Scandinavia on edge. The war was no longer just about gaining territory. It was about survival. Both the Hells Angels and the Bandidos had their backs against the wall, and the stakes had never been higher. The year began with another brutal reminder of the stakes. In Norway, a Hells Angels clubhouse in Hamar was bombed by Bandidos members using homemade explosives. It wasn't just a message, it was a declaration of war. The attack left the building in ruins, but miraculously, no one was inside at the time.
Finally, we reach 1996, which in my opinion was the most impactful year of the war because of just some of the insane shit that went down. And it seemed that the Bandidos wanted to up their explosive influence by first throwing a bomb at a Hells Angels clubhouse in Hamar in Norway, and then following it up with petrol bombing another clubhouse and a tattoo studio in Oslo.
The Bandidos, who had been steadily building their presence across Scandinavia, were now sending a message that would be felt far beyond the borders of Denmark. It didn't take long for the Hells Angels to retaliate. In Helsinki, the Bandidos' headquarters was attacked by a group of Hells Angels armed with AK-47s. 2 members of the Bandidos were injured, one of them the vice president of the Finnish chapter, who later died from his wounds.
The Hells Angels, however, opted for a much more precise attack. The Hells Angels preferred precision hits compared to the louder and destructive option of explosives. So, on the 1st of March, they set their plan into motion by first attacking a Bandidos clubhouse in Helsinki. They managed to injure 2 members, one of whom was the Vice President Jarkko Koko, who died from his injuries a few days later.
This marked the beginning of an escalation that would define the remainder of 1996. The violence grew even more public and brazen, then went to the airport attack.
I mean, it was a very serious war. They had a shootout in the international airport.
In Malmö, a Hells Angels member opened fire on a group of Bandidos in the middle of a crowded nightclub. The gunshots rang out, hitting several people, but once again, miraculously, no one died. As the war dragged on, the use of military-grade weapons became commonplace. The Bandidos, having gained a reputation for using rocket launchers and grenades, continued to escalate their attacks. They used submachine guns and automatic rifles, gunning down several Bandidos members in the heart of the city. The Bandidos, who had grown increasingly confident, were caught off guard. The streets of Copenhagen ran red with blood that night. By mid-1996, both sides were locked in a brutal war of attrition. Neither the Hells Angels nor the Bandidos were willing to give up. In Oslo, the police conducted multiple raids, but the biker gangs were always one step ahead, hiding weapons and drugs in hidden caches across the city. Every time the authorities seemed to gain ground, the violence would flare up again, keeping everyone on edge. The war reached its peak in August 1996, when both sides decided to escalate the conflict beyond just guns and bombs. The Bandidos launched a daring attack on a Hells Angels clubhouse in Helsingborg using a stolen rocket launcher. The explosion was so powerful that it caused the building to collapse, sending debris flying through the air. Again, no one was killed, but the sheer brutality of the attack was a chilling sign of how far things had gone. It seemed like there was no way out. The Great Nordic Biker War had become a cycle of violence that fed on itself. Every attack led to more retaliation, and every retaliation led to more bloodshed. The governments of Scandinavia, desperate to stop the carnage, stepped up their efforts. But the war raged on, untamed. As the year came to a close, the question remained: who would be left standing at the end? Both the Hells Angels and the Bandidos had suffered devastating losses, and there was no sign that the violence would let up in the near future. The war had reached its peak, but it wasn't over yet. And with every passing day, the bloodshed only seemed to grow worse. Silence descended in 1997. The explosive violence that had consumed Scandinavia for a decade began to subside. The Great Nordic Biker War ended not with a final battle, but with truce.
Our job being to
broker the peace
between the Bandidos in Denmark and the Hells Angels in Denmark. And ultimately they did. And do I think it was entirely because George Weggers and I negotiated that? No, I don't, but I think we played a big hand in it, you know. Right. We were very adamant about, you know, getting this put behind us. I'd made several trips to Europe to talk to everybody. And
no true victor emerged. The Hells Angels dominated Denmark, but the Bandidos' influence stretched deep into Norway and Sweden. Too many dead, too many broken bodies. Law enforcement's grip had tightened.
By 1997, after years of bloodshed and a mounting death toll, a truce was finally brokered between the Hells Angels and the Bandidos. The war had taken a heavy toll on both sides, with clubs losing members, facing criminal charges, and experiencing internal divisions.
Smaller clubs disappeared. The Morbids' MC faded into obscurity. The Rebels' MC shattered. Even the mighty Hells Angels lost significant membership. Their control over Christiania, once absolute, was severely weakened. Police became the real winners. They infiltrated biker gangs, arrested key figures, and dismantled remaining strongholds. By the late 1990s, these once feared organizations were shadows of their former selves. But the culture, immortal. A new breed of biker emerged, more subtle, more underground, but no less dangerous. The scars of the Great Nordic Biker War would be felt for generations. The desire for power, respect, and dominance never truly disappeared. The cycle of violence continued, just differently. In the shadows where outlaws are born, the legend of the Great Nordic Biker War would live on, a testament to human conflict, brotherhood, and the thin line between order and chaos.
However, while the truce officially ended the open conflict, tensions and rivalries still smoldered beneath the surface.